everybody. Today we're going to be talking about section 5.10, which is on urbanization. The learning objective for today is that you can describe the effects of urbanization on the environment. We're going to look at how urbanization impacts the hydrologic cycle and also the carbon cycle, and then looking at like urban surfaces versus natural landscapes and this concept of urban sprawl, what it is and what it is causing. So the first thing is just kind of some general information about urbanization. So first of all, urbanization is the removing of vegetation to convert natural landscapes to city, like urban environments. So what's going to ultimately happening is that you're going to replace soil, vegetation, and wetlands with impervious surfaces like concrete, asphalt, and cement, which are not going to allow water to infiltrate into the ground. So what this is going to lead to, if you look at the natural versus urban, is we're going to have less infiltration. We're going to have a lot more runoff, which is going to go straight into sewers and is going to ultimately potentially have pollution in it, which can then run off into larger bodies of water. What it also is going to cause is that urbanization prevents groundwater recharge. So think of all those aquifers where we get our drinking water. And so it's going to cause that precipitation not to go into the ground, but to be running off into local bodies of water. Additionally, it's going to impact the carbon cycle because of carbon dioxide emissions. So first of all, cement production is going to cause carbon dioxide emissions. Thinking of all of this construction machinery, this machinery uses fossil fuels. So as it is working to build the urban areas, it's going to be releasing more carbon dioxide. Additionally, because we are cutting down trees for these urban areas, you're going to have deforestation. So you're going to have a loss of future carbon sequestration, which is where the plants are going to take in the carbon and store it. And also when you have all these trees cut down and decomposing is going to be releasing carbon dioxide as well. And lastly, when you have urbanization, you're going to have a lot more people packed into these areas. You're going to need landfills to accommodate all the things that these people are disposing. And landfills are going to release methane, which is another part of the carbon cycle, but it is an even more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So specifically, we're going to first focus on what can happen with urbanization in coastal cities, which kind of is going to impact some of the areas in Washington that are near the coast. So population growth in coastal cities can lead to what's called saltwater intrusion. And saltwater intrusion is where you're going to have excessive groundwater withdrawal through like wells near the coast, which is going to lower that freshwater table and is going to allow saltwater to seep into the groundwater. So if you look here, if we've normally got our water table and the fresh water is kind of pushing up against the salt water and it's got its normal kind of boundary there, if you start decreasing the fresh water because we're using it for drinking water, then the pressure of the salt water is going to be even more and it's just going to end up flushing in. So the salt water is going to intrude on the freshwater water table, which is no good if you're trying to get your water from that fresh water because now it's salt water and we can't drink that. Now, another problem that's going to come is from sea levels rising. Now, as we've talked about with urbanization and increased carbon dioxide levels, increased carbon dioxide leads to global warming, which is going to lead to what's known as thermal expansion. And that's just where as the ocean warms up a bit, its particles are going to be a little bit farther apart because as liquids warm, their particles move apart. So this is going to lead to thermal expansion, which is going to just cause the oceans to expand a little bit. Additionally, with global warming, we have ice caps melting, which further increases ocean volume. And so we're going to get, again, back to part of this problem with your fresh water where it meets the salt water. And the salt water is going to be pushing in because there's more of it. It's higher, which is going to get into the fresh water. And now we only have salt water to drink, which is a problem because we can't do that. So this is going to be specifically with coastal cities that are up against saltwater, some problems that can be happening with this urbanization. So now let's look at trends in population movement. If you look at this diagram here, you can see that the overall trend in the United States, at least, and many other nations, is people are moving away from less dense rural areas. They're moving away from the country, and they're moving towards the urban, more city areas, especially if we look over the past 50 years, less in the country, more in the city. And then we also are going to have this suburban area as well, which I'll explain in a second. So in general, people are going to be moving away from rural areas to more urban areas because there's going to be more jobs. They might be attracted by entertainment. I mean, think of the fact of in Seattle, you're going to have more concerts. You're going to have our sports teams. You're going to have just more events happening in these areas. You're going to have more cultural attractions, and all this is going to attract people because people are going to enjoy partaking in those things, but especially they're also going to enjoy having jobs, which tend to congregate more in urban areas. Now, urban areas actually, surprisingly, tend to be less environmentally impactful per person. And this is because urban areas have the population way more densely gathered, which is going to minimize driving and land use per person. We're going to have smaller places. You're going to have a lot of apartments that stack up. You're going to have more buses because driving just is really annoying when it's really tightly packed. Think of driving in Seattle. And so actually in these urban areas, you're going to have typically less of an environmental impact per person because it's all just tighter in and you're not taking up as much space and resources. However, the highest growth that we currently have, not only are we moving from the country into the city, but we're also having a lot of people moving into these suburban areas. And that's where we're currently seeing the highest growth, actually. And the suburbs are just going to be these less dense areas that are surrounding urban areas. And what this results in is something known as urban sprawl. Whoops. Surprise at the end, it's going to be a positive feedback loop, so stay tuned. So urban sprawl is just going to be the idea of population movement going out of these dense urban centers to less dense suburb areas that surround the city. So for example, if we think of Seattle, which is our local massive urban area, the suburbs are going to be areas like Issaquah or Tukwila, or even farther out, we're looking at Federal Way. Even kind of Fife would be sort of considered a suburb of the greater Seattle area. And so people moving from Seattle to these areas is going to be the urban sprawl. Now, there's a lot of causes of urban sprawl. Now, the first part is going to be the suburbs. The houses are cheaper. And you're also going to get larger homes for the same price. A condo that you might get in Seattle is going to cost the same as a 4-bedroom house in Tukwila. And so people who want more space are going to move for that. Additionally, cars are relatively inexpensive, and cars are going to make it easy to get from the suburbs into the city for work, entertainment, cultural attractions. And so when most people are able to have cars, they're able to make that commute from the more suburban areas back into the attractions of the urban areas. There's also kind of the domino effect. As your neighbors leave, you are also going to potentially be leaving. Now, this is where we're going to start getting into that positive feedback loop. The fewer residents that you have in cities is going to lead to less people who are now there paying taxes, and a decrease in tax revenue for the city is going to decrease the city's services. They're not going to have the money to pay to upkeep their parks, to pay their police department, to pay for metro things like buses. And so what this is going to cause is even more residents are going to leave because their taxes are going up because there's less people to pay it, but they're seeing a lot of the services decreasing. Now, as more residents leave, businesses are also going to follow. And as this happens, you're going to lead to abandoned homes and businesses, which create what's called blight, which you see in the diagram here. They're kind of these unsightly, rundown infrastructure areas. And then even more people are going to leave. So this is all a positive feedback loop because it continues that the stimulus is continuing to be amplified, and ultimately it leads to more and more urban sprawl. So we are going to see that. We might not be seeing it like totally. Well, we're kind of seeing it with Seattle, not like the so extreme end where like everybody's leaving, because Seattle clearly has a lot of people still coming to it. But I'm sure you know of somebody, Ms. Stewart's being one of them, who originally used to live in Seattle, who eventually moved out to not be in this dense urban area. And so, I don't know if you can hear my cats joining me, maybe howling in the background. Sorry about that. But again, this positive feedback loop of this urban sprawl. So now let's look at urban sprawl and transportation. So as urban sprawl occurs, you're going to have expanding highway systems that make travel easier and are going to increase the driving that people are going to be doing. Now, the more people are driving, this is going to increase the money that is made from fuel taxes. Okay, that's really my cat there. You're going to have an increase in this fuel tax revenue, and fuel tax revenue is used to build more highways. So we're going to have more highways being made, which is going to make it easier and easier to commute from the suburbs into the urban areas, which means more people are going to keep moving out to the suburbs. And once again, we got this positive feedback loop going of this urban sprawl, but also of more cars, which use fossil fuels, which goes back to our carbon dioxide and our carbon cycle with more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Now, here's some solutions to urban sprawl and transportation. The first one is going to be urban growth boundaries. And this is where the cities are going to make zoning laws that prevent development beyond a certain boundary. So they can kind of draw these boundaries and make it to try to keep people closer to the urban areas so that we don't have as much of this urban sprawl occurring. Another thing that you can do is you can make it so that public transportation and walkabilities in your city design attract residents to stay. So instead of your city being still decently spread out, you have these areas where it's like you have things like light rails, subways, more buses. You have areas where you could have your grocery stores next to your works, which is next to some parks, which is going to be right. So like you can walk to everything. So why do you need to go to the suburbs if you've got everything you need right in this one area? And then additionally, we can have what's known as mixed land use. And this is where you're going to have residential, businesses, and entertainment buildings all located in the same area. So if you look at this picture here, maybe on the bottom level is where you have your restaurants, your gyms, your like entertainment areas. And then up on top is where you're actually going to have like apartments and places for people to live. And maybe even you have like rooftop bars on the very top here. So in one small square footage area, you can have businesses, you can have people living, you can have entertainment, and it then makes it so that, again, we're having it way easier to have walkability. People are going to feel like, you know what, I've got everything I need here. Like, this is my place. I don't need to go anywhere else. I've got all that I need. So we're actually seeing a lot of this type of development in Seattle and even Tacoma, because this is very much beneficial for reducing some of the problems that can come from urban sprawl. So this is going to be a practice FRQ for 5.10. So you are going to practice the suggested skill of describing disadvantages, advantages, and potential consequences to an environmental problem. So what I want you to do for this practice FRQ is to describe a possible solution to the issue of urban sprawl. But I also want you to identify one possible economic consequence of this solution. So think of like the money of this solution. So that's going to be your practice FRQ for 5.10. Those were your notes on 5.10 about urbanization, and I hope it had some useful information for you.